Because if you're saying thinking outside the box, then my next question is, how far out of the box are you thinking? And then you're still starting with a box. There is no box is the right description. And it, with everything in life, is just do it. Just do it.
Hi, I'm Joe Templin, author of the Amazon Kindle #1 new release, Everyday Excellence and Human Swiss Army. This is the Human Kaizen Podcast, conversation with interesting individuals that embody excellence and can help you be better. My guest today is an absolute treat. He was my co-author on both So Do You Want to Make MDRT or Not? And Choices Creating a Financial Services Career. He is the brother that I never had, my good friend, Dr. Major John Stolk of the Royal Dutch Marine Corps. John, it's good to see you, my friend. What are you reading or learning right now?
Been way too long. It's been way too long. Way too long. Yeah, no, I've been actually been side sliding into more stuff like Ulysses and just to get the broader things of the thought processes going in a different direction and see where that leads.
So expand on that a little bit for the listeners.
Well, you can learn the most from what's the furthest away from you. So if you get something that you think like, I'm never going to read that or I'm never going to learn that or whatever, just do it. Start it and see what happens, because that's where the key lies. You learn the most from something that's the furthest away from you.
That's exactly what John F. Kennedy was talking about when he was talking about, we will go to the moon by the end of this decade. We will create new technologies and all these other things. It was just on the end of comprehension. We had literally only put a man into space a couple of months earlier, and he was talking about going to the moon and back. And so you learn the most from what is furthest from you is literally what is just beyond your reach. Now you figure it out. So in that theme, if you're reaching for this incredible concept or idea, how do you go from where you are today to that point?
Well, first of all, the saying, thinking outside the box, stop it. That's just ludicrous. Because if you're saying thinking outside the box, then my next question is, how far out of the box are you thinking? And then you're still starting with a box. There is no box is the right description. And it, with everything in life, is just do it. Just do it.
And you've certainly just done more than your fair share of things in the past, my friend.
I've been known to do some crazy shit. Yeah.
So how many different airplanes are you qualified on?
Right now? None.
Just not in total that you have been.
About 14. But, right now it's none. And that's one of those things. It's just you pick up and go. My flying career ended with a sinus problem that created a mucus blockage, with the result that it came free with almost like a champagne cork-like effect. And my flying career was done. So what do you do? Well, as a little kid, I always said that I wanted to be a fighter pilot. But, at some time in time, it's when it changes. And you got to go do something else. So that's what I did. Pick up the pieces, get it all straightened out, and go forward.
And just so that our listeners get a slight idea of the natural resilience that you've embodied for the entire decades that I've known you, when you picked up the pieces and put them together into a new mosaic, what direction did that?
Well, actually, I did I got into business, first of all, as a logistics consultant. And one of the things I did first was for a Finnish company to create their logistics and reorganize their logistics, basically out of the Netherlands, where I was living at the time. And for me, it's always been something like creating a future future memory for yourself. So it's almost like a meditation or a hypnosis or self-hypnosis, whatever you want to call it. But as long as you can picture it for yourself where you want to be, and pretend until you make it, as long as you have that picture clear for yourself, and the split between your conscious and your subconscious is an interesting one, and also the time difference between of roughly 4.4 seconds. But as long as you can convince your subconscious that whatever it is that you're making up at that point in time, that's reality, it will become reality. And what I see around me is that people are the biggest restriction is themselves. They are their biggest restriction. And if you look at that split between your conscious and your subconscious, the split roughly happens around 3 or 4. That's that's also the time frame when as you know, when you have kids, is that they'll point at somebody going like, wow, look at that guy. That guy's got a big nose. There's no filter. And that filter comes when that split happens. And after that split happens, you roughly have a subconscious that is like your 12-year-old self, like your crazy little brother that's trying to screw you up. So if you have that little brother and you actively engage with that little brother and you help him guide in the right direction, and as a practical example of that, if something happens and you say to yourself, why can't I do this? It's almost like a hypnotic command for your subconscious. So if you look at them as two different individuals in your own head, which, I know a few that have more than one. Well, we'll skip on that.
We'll come back to that another day.
Yeah, maybe not. That's kind of a dangerous area. Yeah. But anyway, if you look at that split and you catch yourself saying to yourself, why can't I do that? It's just a command for your subconscious. And they say, okay, he wants a list. Here's the list why you can't do this. You can't do this because this, and this. It is just as much work. And there's no preference in your subconscious. It's just as much work. And when you catch yourself saying, why can't I do that? Just to say right afterwards, well, that's not what I mean. I mean, how can I do this next time? And your subconscious will happily provide you with another list. Well, here's the list how you can do that next time. And the funny part is, you can't unthink thoughts. So now that you know that you can correct yourself, you will catch yourself the next time you do that. And the next time you mess yourself up by saying that, you can correct yourself as easily. It doesn't cost you a thing.
Or you just put the addendum, yet. Why can't I do this yet? And gets the entire subconscious aligned and working towards that goal.
Absolutely.
When you end up leaving your first time around with the military and ended up working for this company doing their logistics, you end up doing that. Tell us how that evolved. How eventually you and I ended up meeting, actually.
I started working for that logistics company and transferred to another logistics company. And then I was asked by the owner of a consulting firm to come and work for them because they were transitioning into some other consulting work. They were mainly focusing on procurement management and all that sort of stuff. And they had some other questions. So I ended up leaving working there. And eventually I got contacted by a headhunter and asked me if I wanted to work in New York for 2 years. All right. Why not? I already lived in a couple of places in the world. I happen to speak, I think, a little bit of English, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Not great.
And the 2 years ended up being 20.
And during that time, that's when you end up pick up your doctors of business administration.
Actually, that was before that. Because one of the things that I found is in the whole consulting arena is you find a lot of people that with all the best intentions have learned a trick or two and keep applying that same trick independent of what the customer or client's needs are. And I found that if you look at it in a different way, you know as well as I do, when you sit down with a client and you ask them, well, how is this? How is that? How did this happen? And, where do you want to go from here? And you start creating a plan and you start implementing the plan 2 weeks into it. They go like, well, hang on a second, because my mother-in-law or whatever, something else comes up that they forgot to tell you. And it screws up your whole plan. So I got a little sick and tired of it. So I sat down and I created what I call a business MRI. So it's just like an MRI when you go to the hospital. The MRI itself doesn't resolve anything. It doesn't fix anything. But what it does do is it gives you a clear picture of what is wrong and what you have to do about it. And from there, you can also, do a checklist, if you will, of these are the biggest items I have to fix first. And then I can go to the smaller stuff and to the other stuff and whatever is left. So with creating that business MRI, the analysis of, the last 4 years of financials, tax statements, interviews with clients, interviews with the ownership, interview with and checklists with all personnel, and combine all of that into a 90-page document, roughly, and say, well, okay, so here, this is what the issues are, and leave it to the customer to say, well, how are we going to fix this? Whether he's going to fix it himself, or he's going to hire another consultant, or he's going to hire me to fix it, doesn't really matter. But to me, at that point, it doesn't really matter because I had split up in 3 pieces. One piece was the analysis, and you pay me for the analysis, and what you do with it doesn't matter. And then the second part was a possible implementation process of the changes that need to be done in that company. And then the third part was maybe once a month a phone call or something like that to keep them on track. So that's how I started in this more serious consulting business, in the sense of doing more complex jobs, doing more complex companies. Because when you have a really good questionnaire and interview on the front end, you don't have any surprises. And you'll learn very early on that they employ family members as, one of those things that hardly anything can go wrong with that.
Well, of course. Nobody gets divorced.
So that was, I've actually told a client who had hired his brother-in-law to just pay his brother-in-law the $65,000 he was making a year and just never allow him into the office, because that was better for his clients than letting him in. That's a different story.
Your background in military and business have been working within these organizations and creating processes and all this. How would an individual who's an employee take the concept of a business MRI, take some of these analysis tools or the theories behind them, and apply them to themselves? Because very often they're not in a position to be applying them in the corporate world.
No, agreed. Well, for one thing, is stop lying to yourself. That would be a nice one to begin with. Don't keep up with the Joneses, because the Joneses don't care. You got to do what you got to do. I had a colleague here. I also work with some people that are diagnosed with PTSD. And I had a colleague here, and he was sitting on my couch, and I said, you know what? I actually only have one question for you. What is the alternative benefit for you to have this diagnosis? And he didn't have an answer. So that's what I also mean is when you stop lying to yourself is you have to look at the things that are not funny too, to fix the total picture. And if you have the tendency just to be a yes man, well, then allow yourself just to be a yes man, and there's limitations to that. But if you don't want to be a yes man, you got to stand up for it. And it doesn't mean that you have the first guy that disagrees with you, you have to punch him in the face. But you have to stand up for your own thoughts, for your own ideas. And that's also partly why at the time I wrote this document, what is it that I do? And it has some items in there like, unlike politicians, I just give my opinion. And based on the information I've got, I build an opinion, and that opinion is never related to the amount of money I'm getting for this analysis. Or that's why I never own stock or have owned stock of companies that I worked with, because I don't want to have any alternative benefits from what I do. If you have alternative benefits, you get into a conflict and you'll never end up where you need to be.
So talk to me about that potential conflict and that fakeness. You and I had a conversation related to Lang previously on true self, false self.
Well, there's the Lang portion of that is that he created this model to diagnose schizophrenia, depending on how big the false self the individual had compared to the true self. The model I made, and I can provide that to you if you don't have it anymore, but the model I made is actually a model that is changing over time. If you look at the model before 1850, the average individual will have a true self with a very small peel of false self around it that mainly was caused by the fact that everybody lived in a 10-mile area, or roughly what you can do on horseback. And so if you walk in somewhere and tomorrow you say, I'm a baker, everybody will say, well, Joe, come on. I know you're not a baker. I know your sister. I know your brother. I know your nephew. I know where you live. I've known you for 30 years. I know you're not a baker. So you have very little possibility to create that false self around your true self. Now, the interesting thing is that the true self is really interested in the rest of the world. The false self is only interested in itself. So looks on, it's kind of like the joke you have with police officers in certain countries that they have mirrored sunglasses, but with the mirror on the inside. So the changes go into 1850 around the industrial period, in the Industrial Revolution, where people are moving to the city, where you don't have that tight-knit social network around you, that everybody knows you. So people move to the city, and that allows them to start again or start over. And you can see that false self can slightly grow because there's no checks and balances on that false self to stop growing, because nobody really knows them. They're in a new city, they're in a big city, maybe in another country. So you have that restriction is almost gone from the social network that's around it. And what I'm seeing since 2004, with the coming of social media, is that there's no freaking limit to how big that false self can be. And that's one of the terrifying things is, somebody goes to the bathroom and they created something beautiful and they make a picture of it and they want 1,500 likes. And if they don't, then they're all depressed for the rest of the day. And as far as I'm concerned, it all went downhill when we started playing dodgeball and everybody got a medal for joining in.
Let's talk about that reward system then, where we went from a point where medals were for winners or survivors to the point where everybody gets a medal and everybody knew who you were. And so you, for the most part, knew who you were, to where we are today with you can have 20 different profiles on different dating sites. And you can, be searching for that constant dopamine hit on 10 different social media platforms simultaneously. So expound upon that a little bit.
Well, your brain is constantly looking for input. And if that input changes constantly, you get that release of dopamine, like you said. So if you look at your phone, all you have to do is swipe and you get different content. So it's interesting to me. The Netherlands has been fairly liberal in the sense with weed and all that sort of stuff for years. But to me, it's interesting that there's no restriction on alcohol. But if you look around, if you look at kids, 15, 16-year-old being depressed, I'd never heard of it. Not that, maybe I'm becoming to be an old fart. That could be, but that phone is a bigger threat to society than smoking a joint.
And Harvard just released a study, I think it was last week, on Facebook users and social media, that the more you rely on this, because it is a dependency issue, that the more depressed that you are. And if we were to interpolate, and yes, interpolation is dangerous in terms of taking it too far, but there is a very strong correlation between the external dependence on the instant gratification through the phone and these other things, and the incidence of narcissism, depression, anxiety, all these other things.
Oh, and absolutely.
People are saying this, and maybe we should do something to break that cycle.
Well, just look at the physical input or the physical effects of using that phone constantly. You know, you and I, we talked about the body-mind feedback loop, and you know quite a bit about it as well. But what's interesting is that when you're constantly focusing your eyes on that same distance, on that same screen, you may be looking at a picture of a landscape, but you're not really looking, you're not changing the focus of your eyes because that screen is on the same distance from your eyes. So what you're seeing is more eye problems, more hearing problems, because they're constantly walking around with these earplugs in, and you know, on the Max Richter scale, and you know, damaging ears is one thing, but just, you know, if you look at the way most people are using their phone, right? So they have their phone and they're sitting like this. So you have your chin on your chest. Well, here's the funny part. Chin on your chest is most of the time for your body is from that body-mind feedback. Is I'm tired. I want to take a little nap. So if you are at the end of the day, when you're sitting like this all freaking day and you're tired, it's because you're tricking your system. You're tricking your body by constantly saying I'm tired because I'm sitting with my head down. If you are nodding behind the wheel because you're sleepy, all you have to do is change your seat so a little bit forward. So you lift up your head to look around. As soon as you lift up your head, your body is going to respond differently because most people in the car, in their car too, are sitting all the way as far as they can, you know, they can just remove remove the front seat and lay on the back. You know, I don't know what's cool about it. You know, it doesn't help your vision. But if you lay back in your car with your chin on your chest because you're driving and you can barely reach the wheel, that is signaling your body that you're going to sleep. So your senses are reduced. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes about it.
So let's talk about a couple of little biohacks around that people can do. You know, my favorite one is every 30, 40 minutes, you get on up, you move around, you change your field of sight. Hopefully you can go outside so that you can see some rough natural patterns as opposed to the linear, you know, prisons that we all live in, whether it's an office or a school or an actual prison, and get the blood flowing a little bit to get the mind working and change your visual field. Like we have talked about, focus on something close further so that the eyes are actually moving and flexing essentially. Yep. Beyond that, what are a couple of really quick that somebody could apply?
If I can elaborate on that one piece, please. You know, a lot of people are just spending a lot of time on their screen or at their screen. So I actually, in the beginning, I had like a little egg timer on my desk. And this, I'm talking 30 years ago when I really started working with computers. A little egg timer, 20 minutes. Every 20 minutes, I looked up and then tried to find 5 different positions further and further away and, you know, do those back again also. And it takes 15 seconds, but it regains or retains your eyesight. I was 55 before I finally had to give in and then get myself some reading glasses, and they were +1. So I went to the store here, and they go like, "Well, you don't really. It's on the verge of needing one." And then they looked at my age and they go like, "How did you do that?" But if you keep your eyes flexible, it's a big difference. It's a big difference. But the best one, I think, is, I think it was a study from Hamburg University where they took people with, that were manic depressed, and they injected the muscles that make a frown on your face or make a sad face. They injected those muscles with Botox. So they couldn't deliberately move those muscles anymore. And the muscles that make a smile were the only ones that were working. So they were smiling the day away. And in the meantime, they were trying to convince themselves that they were so sad. But when they looked in the mirror, all they could see and all they could feel was a smile on their face. And quite a big group of people were off their medications within 3 months. And we're not using it because the same with the winner position we talked about. I'm blanking on which university it was that did the study. They brought in a couple of headhunters, and they've asked roughly 90 students to come in with their resumes and do an interview. So they split the group up in 3. First 30 go in without any instructions whatsoever. 50-50 was hired. The second group, they told them to go, before you go into your interview, go to the bathroom and cross your legs, go sit on the toilet seat, but cross your legs, cross your arms, and sit slightly forward and hold that position for 2 minutes.
So the chin on the chest that you were just talking about.
Yeah, well, and the majority of those people were, they were not hired. And then the last group, they told, go to the bathroom before you go your interview and make this position like you just won the race. So your stance is roughly shoulder width. Make fist, stick your arms up in the air like you just won the race, hold that for 2 minutes, and then go do the interview. And the majority of them were hired. Now, you can tell me whatever you want, but what's interesting is you can distinguish the group who did what by their blood work. So if you can see that within 2 minutes within the blood work, and it extends to 3.5, 4 hours after you hold that position, on the other hand, if you go to the doctor with, I'm so tired or I'm depressed, the doctor can't charge you for taking that winner position. So there's another issue right there. So you can fix yourself a lot.
So you would, before we went off on talking about the winner position, you had mentioned...
Yeah, that's not going to be the last time we're going off.
No, it's not. Oh, look, something shiny. So we had talked about the having the ocular flexibility. Let's take, and that allowed you to be able to literally see better longer. Let's take that idea of flexibility or resiliency and start applying it to the mind. You've talked about some of the simple biohacking skills that lead directly to physical health. Let's extend it further into additional mental health space.
Well, there's some decent books about that recently as well. What I find interesting is whenever a new book comes out in that with that topic, I will try to pick it up. Currently, I have on my e-reader 12,000 something books. I don't think I'm going to do it tonight, but I'll get to them eventually. What's interesting is that we don't really know enough about the brain to be really precise. But we do know a lot of things that we can do that have a certain effect. We may not always know how that effect is accomplished, but we can measure and see that it has an effect. And the book I was reading recently was about self-directed neuroplasticity.
Cool.
And that's an interesting topic, but when I thought I got to read that. So, but reading through it, I'm looking at stuff, I recognize things from previous works from maybe 15, 20 years ago, and it's put into a new jacket, but there's not a heck of a lot of new stuff in there. And, I talked about future memory before. If you create that future memory, that it's almost like a biohack in itself. And I'm reading through this book about self-directed neuroplasticity. Hey, it's almost the same thing. It is picturing in your mind, focusing, meditating, self-hypnosis, call it what you want to call it. But it all comes down to the same thing. You convince yourself of this picture of where you want to be and pretend it's now. And it will trick your subconscious to thinking it is now, and it will start reacting that way.
And this has been around for thousands of years. The Old Testament says the people without vision will perish. The Bhagavad Gita's talk about it. All the current sports psychologists will talk about, closing your eyes and doing focused mental practice to visualize sinking the shot or the putt or whatever. So it's one of those things that we've known this for thousands of years.
Sure.
Why aren't people actually doing it though, John?
That's a risky one because there's a lot of that was pushed out by religion. And I don't know if you want to go there.
When you say pushed out, was it that the religion was pushing it so that you would do this, or religion, organized religion?
No, actually, fine. We'll go there. If I look at the Old Testament and I look at how the Old Testament would fit into, let's call it, Catholic religion, there was a lot of stuff they didn't like. So if you look at the Council of Nicaea, where they basically created their own version of what they thought would support their organization, if you will, you see a lot of changes. And, there's complete parts that were taken out. There were other parts that were put in, and things taken out of context because it did or did not support what they had in mind. And it's all about wealth and power, as far as I'm concerned. And that's why I do believe there's something there, but I don't believe it is organized religion that is the answer.
So let's spin that forward 1,500 years today, where instead of the Catholic Church determining these are the books that are going to be read, these are the books that we're going to include in the canon, essentially.
Yeah.
Bring that into the current educational / society of this is what is accepted and these things over here, don't look at them.
Ooh, that's also a scary one, dude. That's funny.
I'm trying to not get you in too much trouble.
That's too late. That's too late. Well, that's an interesting one as well, because if you look at education and or medication, if you will, or the medical field, I have a lot of questions about that as well. Because if I see, for instance, with PTSD, there's a lot of people there being diagnosed with PTSD. I'm not going to deny that it's there, but in some cases, what I see and what I hear is it is questionable whether it is PTSD. Because if you look at the other side of the diagnosis, is the average doctor has about 8 minutes to send you out the door with a prescription. Because that's all they have in their agenda, and otherwise they can't make their hourly average. And then there's the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is basically like a phone book with all the allowed or certified diseases or whatever you can have. And on that specific code or on that specific diagnosis is also a code that is used to bill the insurance company or bill the individual that comes to sit across from you. So if you don't know what it is, or if you can't find it in the DSM-5, what I see is that oftentimes they will find something that is the closest. So at least they have a billing code so they can get paid. And my question is then what is the priority? Is the priority to mask the symptoms within 8 minutes with a prescription and send them out the door? Or is the case that you really want to help somebody and want to cure them instead of just mask the symptoms? And I think there's a sliding scale in that as well. I'm not saying every doctor's like that, but it appears that more and more situations like that are there. And then with education, there's a whole other one. I sat in with a with a lady who asked me to come with her because her son was diagnosed with ADHD. But she was a single mom, so she asked me if I could sit in and help her out. So I'm listening to this and I'm blanking on what the plan was. So it was like a 601 plan or whatever the heck it was. It doesn't really matter, but there was a plan. And that plan was to have her son go to school. And then if he had a test, he could go to a separate room with a teacher and he could spend as much time as he needed to, work on this problem or work on his test. So I asked him, okay, so then he goes to middle school. Then what? No, it's the same plan. Okay, then he goes to high school. Yeah, it's the same plan. And it's still covered. And then I asked him, okay, so what if he goes to university? Well, it's not called a 601 plan or whatever the plan was, but it's called something else. And it's basically the same, but it's just different for college. Okay, fine. So then I asked her, and then he goes to work. Where is he going to find a job or a boss that tells him, take however much time you need to finish this job and you can go sit by yourself in a separate office and they, put on Mozart and make sure that you get this job done on the time that you think you need to have this done. Because this system is not designed for the student. This system is designed for the school to push a student through without too much trouble. It's not designed for the student. It's designed for the school.
And being the father of non-neuronormal children, one of the things that I push for is not that they get this special treatment all the way through because it will fail them when they are 18 or 21 or whatever.
Yep, exactly.
It is also to teach the child how to adapt to be able to fit into what society demands or be in a position to create their own direction afterwards. So instead of having the boss giving them, 18 hours in Mozart and all that, how do they learn what they need to learn to become their own boss? So that instead of relying on a corporate structure and the processes there, they can go on out and do their own thing and still be financially viable. So bring this back a little bit, John. It seems like
if I can add one thing that got them really over the top is I asked them how many kids per class were taking Ritalin.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm blanking on what it was, but it was a ridiculous amount of kids. So I told them, or I asked them, they're kids. Their body is still developing and we're putting a ton of medication in there and we don't really know what the long-term effects are. And what you have to do with that. So I said, isn't it easier or better for those kids not to take medication and have one adult take medication to fix the problem? So they all looked like wild-eyed, like, what the heck is he talking about? So I told them, well, here's the solution. You give the teacher speed so he can keep up with the kids with ADHD.
Instead of giving all the kids speed, which is what Adderall and Ritalin is.
Exactly. I don't think they went for it.
Or, instead of thinking outside the box, as you mentioned earlier, look at the box like a three-dimensional cube and be a tesseract and think in the fourth dimension on this and expand our thinking. Why not go back to the old way where we let the kids run around because the physical activity has been shown over and over again to help alleviate the systems and allow them to process. If kids are like jumping and dancing and running around, and you're doing the lessons with them, then the retention rates go so much higher and it allows them to blow off that steam in a positive manner. But again, this violates the processes because whether it's the medical community, as you were talking about, having 8 minutes, or the school system or these other things, it is all about making it easy, having the processes, checking the boxes, and allowing the system to expend the least amount of energy, to essentially be lazy because it's a reflection of the human mind where we want everything to be as simple as possible and just flow through the processes. Having doubt, having questions, expending energy is not the normal condition. And so it looks like we've got a reflection of that in the way we've built the organizations.
I think that's part of it. The other part of it is making everything measurable because we have to score. So what you see is that we are redesigning processes or doing things different to make sure that we can measure it. And I'm blanking on which school it was, but I was reading recently an article on a school where kids, it's mandatory between classes to run. And they have obstacle courses in the hallway. So kids can run over those obstacle courses and, go on monkey bars between classes. So to get rid of some of that energy and get them refocused before the next class. I thought it was brilliant.
I mean, those of us who are ADHD, because I was adult diagnosed, this is literally something that I do. I'll finish this meeting. I'm going to go run around for a couple moments, not climbing on monkey bars, unfortunately, but that would be really cool. But just a couple of minutes. And that goes back to the brain resetting that we had talked about earlier that helps with the visual acuity also. So these are interrelated things that we're seeing the lessons. We've got the scientific proof behind it, yet we're not making much progress around it.
Simultaneously, what I'm seeing, when I was looking into this development of this brain business program, the improving at the speed of thought, what I was finding is if I was talking to a psychologist or to a biologist or to doesn't matter what field you take, is there is so much effort put into that silo that they are working in that they're not willing to change things around or to have a new theory. So they're vividly defending whatever's going on within their silo. And almost per definition, the person that's working in the other silo is wrong because they're in another silo. And what you see is that there is not, in very many situations, there is not a holistic or a total approach. It is a focus on one particular thing. And, what I'm, for instance, missing with the PTSD, to go back on that, is this blast-induced neurotrauma that, it's getting some attention and it's getting some movement now, but for a very, very long time, there was no split. And it's still the same diagnosis. And with stress works cumulative. And it doesn't mean that if you have stress that you get a headache. You could get a lump in your shoulder. Wherever the tension comes out in your body, it's not linear. And I think we're looking at the body too much of a mechanical thing. And if it's, if you get a knot in your shoulder, then the problem is in your shoulder. And it could very well be because you have too much stress that you're creating tension in that shoulder. And that's where you get the knot from. And a massage will, release it somewhat, but it doesn't take away it releases some of the symptoms, but it doesn't take away the cause. And I think
that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, with the siloing, but also going back to the consultant who learns a couple of tricks and applies those tricks, same way that the medical community, it's got to be this, it's got to be this, it's got to be this,
yep.
As opposed to having a higher order understanding and being able to realize the interplay between the different components. Your stress is creating cortisol. The cortisol is leading to your belly fat. Your belly fat combined with you sitting there with your chin down all day is creating a cycle internally in your mind of tiredness. And because of that, you're then being an energy hog with your brain. And so you're not focusing on different things. You're getting the brain frog and hence, all these other bad components. So how would you, in the last 2 minutes, John, break those negative feedback loops on an individual basis?
On an individual basis is stop telling yourself that you can't do it. And, if you want to change everything around you, because this is what I have seen also with my brain business seminar. People that will come to the seminar will say, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And within 3 weeks, they're back into their old habits. The best thing you can do if you are serious about change is change the anchors around you, because they're all anchors. If you sit at the same desk in the same position, looking at the same window, looking at the same picture on the same spot on the same wall, those are all anchors. So if you say you want to change, then frickin' change. turn your desk around, put your chair on the other side, move your phone to the left of the desk if it's on the right, take your 3 paintings that you have on the wall or drawings, whatever, art on the wall, and move them around, and maybe keep moving them around until you really are committed to the change and that you're applying the changes that you wanted to do. There's, you know what the biggest anchor is in your life, right?
We're not going to mention her name.
No, your mom is your biggest anchor in your life. She's not impressed with anything you do. She changed your diapers. So fine, you're a rocket scientist. I changed your diapers. So that's always how she's going to look at you. So maybe if you really want change after you go to a seminar or you read a book, that's another thing though. Don't just read a book and apply what's in the book, because experience is not transferable. If you just blindly take what's in the book, it's not going to work. Take Joe's book. You have to apply what's in there to your life. Make it your own version, and that's what's going to stick.
Excellent. John, thank you so much, my friend. I miss these long, random, but insightful conversations that we used to have on a regular basis.
Hey.
So I think that is actually a great place, because you did bring up the book and the very idea behind having an individualized action item to do something to create a change in yourself and the environment that then creates that feedback loop. So if people wanted to find you, how would they find you? Assuming you want to be found.
Right. Well, the easiest way to find me is through email. So it's john@johnstolk.com. Any comments are welcome. I will try to answer as many as I can. Or maybe we can, based on any feedback we get or I get, maybe we can do another podcast.
Oh, we're definitely going to be doing this again, my friend. And I will make sure all that contact information is in the show notes so that people can find you, reach out to you. And once again, thank you. I'm Joe Templin. This has been the Human Kaizen Podcast. Be excellent and grow today.